Fantasy football trades can break a friendship just as easily as they can break open an entire league that you were previously struggling in. And that brings us to today's goal, establishing 3 key buy low candidates to help take those rosters from good to great in fantasy leagues of all shapes and sizes. As always, it's a great day to be great. Up first, Houston Texans running back Dameon Pierce. Now, things did not start off great here from a utilization standpoint. The Texans were not willing to give Pierce even half of the offensive snaps during the first 2 weeks of the season. That said, we have seen a major shift in this usage in recent weeks, with Pierce now regularly pushing for a 60% snap rate, and most notably in week 5, handling 87% of the Texans' designed rush attempts. Really, guys, the larger issue with why Pierce has only worked as the RB32 in PPR points per game this year comes down to this troublesome offensive line. Overall, the Texans are one of just 7 offenses averaging less than 1 yard before contact per carry this season. Now, you can't be too hard on the offensive line. We have seen them deal with more injuries than any other group throughout 2023. But that said, guys, when we find out that Dameon Pierce trails only Tony Pollard and Josh Jacobs in terms of fantasy points below expectation, I think we can agree the offensive line has had at least a pretty big role in that coming to fruition. Don't believe me? Well, look at the film then, people, because we are still very much seeing the sort of open field elusiveness and just overall explosiveness with the football in his hands from Pierce this season that we saw all over the place back in 2022. That said, I'm not exactly sitting here saying that we're going to see Pierce go for a $120 and 2 touchdowns this week. Very tough matchup against the Saints on the docket. And also, we're going to have to deal with a week 7 bye here. So if you are willing to maybe wait another week to take this advice, you could find his value even lower because, guys, it's the week 8 schedule on that we are really buying into here for Pierce in this Texans rushing game. I mean, just look at this schedule, guys. From week 18 to week 14, we're going to get to see the Houston Texans feast on the ground against teams like the Panthers, the Buccaneers, the Bengals, the Cardinals, the Jaguars, the Broncos, and the Jets. That's 3 of the bottom 4 defenses in the NFL in terms of PPR points per game allowed to opposing running backs, and only 1 group ranked higher than 15. So, hey, not softballs the entire way, but beggars can't be choosers, and things are still objectively looking very good from a scheduling standpoint for Pierce down the stretch. Now, maybe you, a scholar, will point out that, Ian, the Texans have to play the Titans twice in the fantasy playoffs. That's not ideal. Correct, but as Zach Moss showed us last week, maybe this Titans run defense isn't quite the same sort of monster they have been in past years, and we should also, bear in mind that it isn't exactly a guarantee that Mike Vrabel and company will have all that much to play for come late December. Recent Yahoo trades involving Pierce have netted the Texans stud second-year back for guys like Jerome Ford, Gabriel Davis, Amari Cooper, and Sam Laporta. I'm not saying that this trade is going to be for everyone. Again, if you have a major need for as many points possible in weeks 6 and 7, I totally get it. Just realize this is a great chance to buy low on what still very much looks like a great talent at the position inside of an ascending Texans offense who has a borderline erotic schedule in weeks 8 through 14. All right, guys, on to our next buy low candidate. This time we're talking about Bengals veteran running back Joe Mixon. Now, it hasn't been great from an efficiency standpoint on the ground. We've seen Mixon post objectively bad numbers in terms of yards per carry, yards after contact per carry, and missed tackles forced per rush attempt. But that said, guys, they're almost identical to what he did last year. What we haven't seen is the same level of fantasy production from those numbers as what we saw in 2022. Overall, Joe Mixon turned the league's second most fantasy-friendly workload in terms of expected PPR points per game into an RB6 finish per game in 2022. Now, I know what you're thinking. Ian, he had the 5-touchdown explosion and didn't do anything the rest of the year. Normally, I hate taking away a player's good plays and saying, well, now what do you have? A bunch of bad plays? But fine, I'll fancy this idea for a second. Take away that game, and Mixon still would have finished last season as the RB12 on a per game basis. Take that for your data. Seriously though, guys, looking ahead back to 2023, Mixon does only stand as the RB11 right now in expected PPR points per game. And why could that be? What has changed for Mixon? Is it his usage? Or maybe, just maybe, it's the reality that this Bengals offensive environment, at least for the first month of the season, was among the very worst in all of football. Seriously, we're talking about a Bengals group that was the 7th highest ranked scoring offense last year and still sits as just the 27th ranked group through 5 weeks of 2023. That said, such great reason for optimism moving forward, considering just how much more mobile Joe Burrow looked during that great win over the Cardinals in week 5. I am more confident than ever that we're going to see some of this firepower return to what has otherwise been one of the league's very best offenses for the better part of the last 2+ years. And once that firepower really starts returning on a weekly basis, don't be surprised if Mixon standing as a legit fantasy RB1 comes to fruition. He is, after all, one of very few running backs still playing on over 75% of his offensive snaps for the season thus far. Just look at week 5 in particular to see how close he was to finding a big game. Most expected half PPR points in week 5. The only problem was he got stuffed not once, not twice, but 3 times at the 1-yard line on a single drive. Pretty sheeshy moment right there, if I do say so myself. Very real Yahoo trades have occurred this week featuring Mixon getting got for guys like DeAndre Hopkins, Jordan Addison, and even Najee Harris. I am a huge fan of the Mixon side in all of those deals, thanks to the reality that I have far more confidence in the Bengals' overall offense being more of an elite unit than those other squads. Joe Mixon, not the world's most efficient running back, but guess what? Style points don't matter in fantasy football, and this is one of very few chances we have to buy low on what is truly still a workhorse running back in the year 2023. All right, guys, on to our third and final buy low candidate. It's going to be second-year Saints wide receiver Chris Olave. Fantasy managers are frustrated. Right now, Olave ranks outside the top 30 wide receivers in PPR points per game, and as we saw in week 5, multiple missed opportunities, one on a potential 30-yard touchdown where he couldn't quite maintain contact through the ground, almost a Dez caught it situation. And by the way, Dez did catch it. And the other time was a seemingly routine pitch and catch down the sideline that Olave just simply couldn't get 2 feet down on. That said, guys, look at the overall opportunity here because it is pretty fantastic. Overall, Olave joins a truly vaunted list, including Tyreek Hill, Justin Jefferson, Devontae Adams, and A.J. Brown as the only 5 wide receivers to rack up 500 or more air yards through the first 5 weeks of 2023. Of course, we don't get fantasy points for air yards, and Olave's receiving yards have lagged far behind that group, and this has caused him to be the 4th lowest wide receiver in terms of fantasy points per game, below expectation thus far in 2023. This forces us to ask a question. Is Olave maybe not that good at football, and that's why he's not making the most out of his opportunity? Or maybe has there been something wrong with that opportunity that we can expect to change moving forward? As you guys can probably guess from, the subject of this video, I'm leaning towards the latter scenario here. And guys, 2 key updates from last Sunday should help you do just the same. First of all, Chris Olave seemingly suffered some sort of ankle issue in the pregame that had the fantasy football world in a frenzy before that game, but he went on to run a route on 100% of the team's dropbacks, despite the Saints blowing out the Patriots 34-0. Look, we'll see the injury reports all week, and maybe he will be a little bit limited, but if this was truly something to worry about, we can be assured that the Saints would have been a bit more cautious with Olave in a game that they could have afforded to do so. Additionally, Derek Carr came out and played so much better in week 5 than what we saw in week 4 while he was more actively dealing with that right shoulder injury. The average target depth increased, the yards per attempt increased, and just generally based on the eye test, I'm talking about multiple big time throws that unfortunately weren't caught. Carr put forward one of his best performances of the season. I know. It's Derek Carr. We shouldn't expect him to play at an all-pro level for 17 games, and it's not ideal that he's already dealing with any sort of injury. But that said, guys, one of the most fantasy-friendly QB backup situations does reside in New Orleans, with Jameis Winston waiting in the wings should anything too serious happen to Derek Carr. So maybe not the most ideal scenario for Saints fans to think through, but for Chris Olave fantasy managers, we have not one but 2 quarterbacks in New Orleans that I do believe can help him supply wide receiver 1 heights. This week's matchup against the Texans' surprisingly good defense isn't ideal, but after that, we get the Jaguars, the Colts, the Bears, and the Vikings before the Saints have to go on their Week 11 bye. That is a seriously fantasy-friendly stretch for this passing game, and I fully expect Olave to break out in a major way during it. Recent Yahoo trades have featured Olave getting swapped for guys like Jordan Addison, Alvin Kamara, and even Zach Moss. I'm a fan of the Olave side in all three of these deals, thanks to the potential to buy low on what is still one of the best young talents at the position in the NFL, inside of a passing game that seemingly is getting healthier at the right time and is about ready to go on a seriously fantasy-friendly schedule over the course of the next month and a half. All right, guys, those are my 3 buy low candidates as we stand right now in week 5 of the 2023 season. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you have someone else that you have in mind? Let me know in the comments. Always appreciate reading through those and, getting back to you guys whenever possible, because without you, what the hell are we doing here anyway? So best of luck in those fantasy football trade streets. Best of luck in the matchups, and keep on building towards that playoff appearance, baby. So have a great day. It is always a great day to be great after all. Don't be afraid to go win that fantasy football matchup.